This podcast is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Fiscally responsible, financial geniuses, monetary magicians. These are things people say about drivers who switch their car insurance to Progressive and save hundreds. Visit progressive.com to see if you could save. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and affiliates. Potential savings will vary. Not available in all states or situations.
Hi, I'm Dana Stevens, and this is the Slate Culture Gabfest You Are the Media Now edition. It's Wednesday, November 13th, 2024. And on this week's show, we'll be discussing A Real Pain, a new film written and directed by and co-starring Jesse Eisenberg about two cousins on a trip to Poland to visit their grandmother's birthplace. Like Water for Chocolate, HBO's new 6-part adaptation of the 1989 novel by Laura Esquivel. And finally, we'll talk about the state of the news media as we transition into what I will name, with deep nausea, the second Trump administration. I'm joined today, and this week we are recording remotely, by critic Steve Metcalf. Hey, Steve.
Hey, Dana.
And joining us from Los Angeles, where she's a fellow at the Annenberg School of Journalism, is our dear colleague, Julia Turner. Hey, Julia.
Hello. How are you guys?
I mean,
I'll let you know in 4 years.
Steve appears to be recording from like a small cork box, so I think he's planning to hibernate. But Dana's hair looks great, so
I've got that going. Yeah. Well, I mean, I should say that I'm glad we're talking this week for our Plus about sort of how we're doing in our own, personal choices of how to respond to the new unknown world that we're plunging into, because if we started talking about it now, we would never get into our culture show.
Yeah. And it should be clear, made clear, like, all our laughter is gallows laughter, and I hope it has the sound of sympathy and not glibness. Don't worry, we are in mourning along with you.
Indeed.
So let's move on to our first topic, the new movie, A Real Pain. The actor Jesse Eisenberg is much more than an actor, has been for a while. He's written and starred in 3 plays for the Broadway stage. He's authored a book of short stories and many humor essays for The New Yorker and other places. And in 2022, he wrote and directed his first film, When You Finish Saving the World, which was reservedly praised by critics. Amy Nicholson, always a quotable critic, wrote for Variety that it was a satire that exists in shades of beige. I haven't seen that movie, but that's an unforgettable description. Now Eisenberg has come out with a second indie project that he wrote and directed, and this time he also co-stars in it alongside Kieran Culkin, deservedly beloved for playing Roman Roy on HBO's Succession. In the film, Eisenberg and Culkin play a pair of cousins who travel together to Poland after their grandmother's death to visit the sites there where she lived before emigrating to the U.S., including a concentration camp. This sounds like a heavy premise for a road movie, but in its way, A Real Pain is actually a comedy. It's focused on the troubled relationship between these two young men as much as it is on the horrific history of the place they're traveling to. Let's start by listening to a clip from the movie. In this scene, you'll hear Benji, played by Kieran Culkin, and David, played by Jesse Eisenberg. They're in a first-class train car on their cross-Poland tour. You'll also hear the voice of Will Sharp as the British tour guide who is leading this group through Poland.
Yo, dude, I think we should move.
What?
I think you should move to another train car.
What do you mean?
You don't feel weird being in a first-class car?
No, we paid for it. It's not hurting anybody. No.
Dude, we are Jews on a train in Poland. Fucking think about it.
Benji? Benji?
Yeah.
You're all right up there?
Yeah, sure. Sorry.
Yeah, no worries. I mean, it's, to be fair, fascinating.
No, I mean, I just feel like, sorry.
Okay.
Is anyone else, like, feeling this right now? I mean, does no one else see the irony here?
Jesus, Benji,
like, eating fancy food and sitting up here when 80 years ago we would have been herded into the backs of these fucking things like cattle.
Okay, Benji, I don't think anybody here wants to hear that right now.
Okay, why not? Why doesn't anyone want to hear it?
Because it's depressing.
Okay,
Look,
depressing?
Okay.
All right, Steve, I'm going to start with you on A Real Pain. I wonder what you think of this movie's attempt. I mean, the odd thing to me about this movie is that it's, taking on, obviously, wrestling with some incredibly heavy existential, historical subject matter. And it's doing it through the lens of really sort of a buddy road movie about two guys working out their relationship. And I wonder if you think that works, or did it come off as glib? Do you think that Eisenberg pulled it off?
I never experienced the movie as glib. I thought it quite worked. What's interesting about the movie is it's a question of, I think, of understanding its scale, which is gotten at by the beautiful double entendre of the title. So A Real Pain means both things. It means His cousin, the Kieran Culkin character, is a real fucking pain in the ass. He's very hard to be around, and it's a brilliant portrayal of someone who has a certain charismatic charm that goes to off-putting excess and self-centered excess over and over and over again. But you sense as you get to know them is deeply, deeply wounded. So he's both a real pain in the ass and he is suffering real pain. And the suggestion of this movie, non-didactically, is that that's a third generation legacy of the Holocaust, which their grandmother survived. And I think it is quite good at occupying two horizons and two sort of senses of scale, cinematic scale at the same time, which is that it's both a slight movie and a picaresque movie and a road movie and a buddy movie, and an enormous one, in some ways a gigantic one, because the weight of history and the weight of unsaid are so mammoth within it. And without being melodramatic about it, in fact, by keeping it small and within the world of these two cousins who were very much like brothers in many ways, and their relationship, I think, is quite nicely, in the sense of the word, of precisely delineated. It never becomes a heavy-handed film. And it reminded me very much of the short novella by Cynthia Ozick called The Shawl, which is one of the great non-didactic and indirect accounts of the Holocaust, an incredibly powerful account of a woman who survived it only to end up living in, I think, suburban Florida somewhere, and the sense of how tiny her life is after having been picked up by history in this demented way and miraculously surviving it. Anyway, I was quite moved by the movie. I thought it was good. I would understand, though, Julia, for example, if you felt it was somehow slighting. I was very taken by the movie and even very moved by it. It's not a perfect film and it's not a great film, but it's a very good one. And I was profoundly glad I saw it. And I'm just curious, like, Julia, what do you think?
I really loved it. I agree that it is modest. It seems purposefully modest. It seems to understand that it's hard for any one person several generations removed from the Holocaust to say the revelatory new thing about it. It's not trying to do that at all. And I think the modesty of its ambitions and the clarity of that central relationship is part of the film's strength. And I think fundamentally the film is interested in how humans deal with their own pain and how they contextualize their pain, assuming their pains are more modest than the pain of being subject to a genocide. And so it's curious about the relationship between these two modern men and their two different ways of dealing with being alive in the world and all of the hurt and complication of that. And the thing that's the miracle of it that makes me really admire it is that there's a version of that feels very out of perspective or solipsistic or too interested in the suffering, the modern suffering of the men. And somehow this film always keeps the proper perspective, which, because it's so simple, it's 90 minutes, is beautiful cinematography. It sort of lets the buildings and architecture of Poland and the music of Chopin create this kind of lucid, clear, simple framework, visual framework and auditory framework in which these relationships can unfurl. And I think it actually takes a lot of clarity and restraint and work to keep all of these factors in perspective appropriately. Dana, what did you think?
Yeah, you guys are making me want to see it again. I saw it quite a while back, and like Steve, I feel like I admired its restraint and its modesty and smallness. I think that's really this movie's greatest strength. And I really agree with one critic that we read on the film who said, this is a movie that has the Holocaust as part of its subject matter, but it's not sort of a lesson teaching Holocaust movie, right? I mean, in fact, in a way, it's about the impossibility for these two descendants of a survivor to really understand or grasp what did happen before they were born. It's sort of a movie about the impossibility of breaching that gap of history between generations, because they go to all these places. They go to the camp where she was interned. They go toward the end of the movie to the house where she lived, which was apparently an actual house of a forebear of Jesse Eisenberg in Poland. And at all those places, they experience a kind of longing to understand or connect, with each other and with history, but also the remoteness and the impossibility of connecting. And so that melancholy is sort of what drives the movie. And that's a really smart and interesting way to frame a movie like this. It's not kind of borrowing grandeur, or moral import from history. It's acknowledging the impossibility of our understanding that as modern people. It's also just a wonderful character study of a very specific character, right? I mean, the main character is not Jesse Eisenberg's character. It's really a buddy movie, so they're both the leads, but the movie is really written around and for Kieran Culkin, and it's just really fun to watch him after seeing him on Succession for all those seasons. Just chomp into a juicy, completely different character. Maybe not completely different in that, like Roman Roy, this character is mercurial, unpredictable, damaged. He has things in common with that character, but he's, unlike any of the Roys, is open to a fault, right? And that's just a wonderful thing to get to play as an actor. He's somebody who can't stop charming people, as you say, Stephen, and then can't stop alienating those same people moments later, who seems to have no inhibitions in both the good and bad sense. And so it's about this very specific person's response to trauma and to his own family history, and is not trying to universalize that onto, so feel we all, or so do we all, or something like that. And I appreciate that specificity.
Yeah. I mean, and also the way his character throws light back on to Eisenberg's, right? That in some sense they occupy these two types, though that's putting it way too generically, in relation to the grandmother, who is really two different grandmothers in some sense. To Kieran Culkin, she was with Kieran Culkin. We never meet her in the course of the film. She's only discussed posthumously and in absentia, but it's clear that she had a special wavelength with Kieran Culkin, maybe because there's something off about him and just sort of born in a certain amount. He has the aura of someone born in a certain amount of fixed amount of pain or grief, and she could relate to him. And their relationship was quite warm. Whereas with Jesse Eisenberg, he perceived her completely as a distant figure across some chasm of like time and experience, and stern and frightening. And what I do think's really new about this movie and interesting is that there's a vast literature now on second generation Holocaust experiences, like what it's like to be the child or direct descendant or whatever of a immediate descendant of a survivor. And this is, as people have pointed out, moving it out to the third generation, and the gap just seems so wide, and the suffering of these characters seems so petty in contrast to it. And so there's a poignancy to them trying to bridge that gap on behalf of this person who's now gone forever. But one of the things I love about the movie too is that, according to our research document, like the preparation that went into creating Roman Roy is the same preparation that went into creating this character, which is zero preparation. Like his whole acting style is, according to Eisenberg, he shows up, he looks at the line, he has no idea what scene is being filmed that day. He looks at his lines, which he hasn't really memorized properly, and he's like, okay, let's do it. And you get that incredible volatile spontaneity of a real person coming off of him. And anyway, it's a lovely movie. I was quite taken with it.
It's interesting too, because I actually think one way to read it is the thought experiment. What if someone with the kind of chemical and personal makeup of Roman Roy and the biochemistry of Roman Roy just was born into this family instead? Like there's actually so much similarity in the performances, I think, of a kind of vulnerability, openness, wit, charm, and then kind of sudden violent petulance or lashing out. Like the kind of prototype is quite similar, but then of course the issues and the challenges that are being worked through are their own, and it almost creates like a little meta discussion between the two projects that which is an alley you could go down if you wanted. Obviously, people who direct themselves or make projects for themselves to star in by writing and directing them don't always make themselves the charismatic hero, and sort of playing the straight man is, it's not like Jesse Eisenberg's the first person to do that, but I appreciated the degree to which this project of his is a showcase for another kind of performance, and the sort of self-knowledge to be the kind of like stuffed shirt, nervous nerd next to the beautiful liquidity of Kieran Culkin's performance. And Eisenberg is not the same actor that Culkin is, I don't think. Like the stuffedness and the stiffness reads, but it reads in a different way, I think. but the counterbalance between them, I think, works well. What did you guys make of the rest of the ensemble? I think the performances and characters there are much more thinly sketched. There's a performance from Jennifer Grey, who I did not initially recognize as a Los Angeles divorcee, and then one of the
Really?
Yeah, it's the nose job. Nobody recognizes Jennifer Grey since she fixed her nose.
That is so awesome. Oh my God.
Yeah. And then there's also one pilgrim who is a survivor of the Rwandan genocide. So the film sort of brings that more recent horror into conversation, who then emigrated to Winnipeg, survived the Rwandan genocide with his mother, emigrated to Winnipeg and converted to Judaism and has found Judaism a resonant faith in his own spiritual journeys. And then a couple from Ohio. So that there's sort of these other, fellow pilgrims who are interacted with, but maybe less fully sketched. How did you think that ensemble worked?
I mean, the best thing in that tour group ensemble is Will Sharp, who you heard a little bit of in the clip as the tour guide. He's, I think, really the only one of those characters who isn't just a counterpoint, who represents something, right? The Rwandan immigrant kind of represents actual faith, someone who actually lives by and for his Jewish faith. Whereas a lot of the other, the other more secular Jews, like the two heroes, have a more remote relationship to it. Will Sharp is he's really great in that role, totally unrecognizable from his White Lotus role, and interestingly balanced between, someone who's a foil for the Kieran Culkin character because his knowledge and his need to rattle off facts and all the things that he knows about the Eastern European genocide sort of brush up against the Kieran Culkin character's desire to just sort of exist in that world, right, and commune with his dead grandmother. And then they had this wonderful moment at the end that I won't give away, but, they have sort of a moment of reconciliation that's great. I could have done with a little more fleshing out of those characters. And the movie itself, I admire that it's an hour and a half long. More movies should be an hour and a half long. But I also could have stood a little bit more time with many of those characters, including Jesse Eisenberg. I mean, compared to how well we get to know the Kieran Culkin character, we don't know that much about the Jesse Eisenberg character. Those don't strike me as weaknesses at the time during the movie because it moves along at a nice clip and it's a good watch. But I think it might have benefited from a little more time with them.
I'm going to just disagree gently and say I appreciate the ability of a filmmaker to know what size he wants his canvas to be and where he wants its focus to be, and then do some non-insulting but deft sketching along the periphery. So there aren't obligatory scenes of, just kind of, confected backstory in order to give a false weight or heft to the movie. It knew exactly what its scale was. I thought those people seemed real without them having monologues or turning points or big beats. And I think that's actually quite hard to do. I thought that was deft. I thought that was really nice and very deft.
All right. One more thing I'll shout out before we leave this topic behind is Julia's right. The use of Chopin piano music on the soundtrack. Chopin, of course, being a Polish composer, is really nicely done in this. And it took me a while to notice, wait, all the music is Chopin piano solos. And it sort of becomes... It becomes a sort of thematic accompaniment to the peripatetic journey of these two cousins in a way that works really beautifully. All right, the movie is A Real Pain. It's in theaters right now. I'm sure it will come to streaming at some point, but support your local movie theater and go find it. Since 1981, Justin has been producing world-class Bordeaux-style wines from Paso Robles on California's Central Coast. As the pioneer of Paso, Justin wines are what put Paso Robles on the winemaking map. With a rich history of accolades, Justin produces exceptional wines and is proud to be America's #1 luxury Cabernet. Justin was nice enough to send me a couple bottles of wine a few months back. They were absolutely delicious. The one that I think, found especially tasty was called Isosceles, their flagship Bordeaux style, which comes in a snazzy triangular box and is extremely tasty. Enjoy exceptional wine all season long with Justin, whether it's for seasonal celebrations, festive dinner parties, or gift exchanges. Justin Wine is sure to make your holidays memorable. Pick up Justin Wine today at a store near you Or visit justinwine.com and enter Gabfest20 for 20% off your order. Justin offers the perfect holiday gifts for clients, colleagues, friends, or family. Be sure to check them out at justinwine.com to receive 20% off your order for a limited time.
This episode is brought to you by public.com. Interest rates have fallen, but you can still lock in a 6% or higher yield with a bond account at public.com. That's a pretty big deal because when rates drop, so can the interest you earn on your investment. A bond account allows you to lock in a 6% or higher yield with a diversified portfolio of high yield and investment grade corporate bonds. So while other people are watching their returns shrink, you could be earning regular interest payments. But a yield is not locked in until you invest, so check it out. The good news is it only takes a couple of minutes to sign up at public.com. Lock in 6% or higher yield with a bond account only at public.com/culture. Brought to you by Public Investing, member FINRA plus SIPC. As of September 26, 2024, the average annualized yield to worst across the bond account is greater than 6%. Yield to worst is not guaranteed, not an investment recommendation. All investing involves risk. Visit public.com/disclosures/bond-account for more info.
Laura Esquivel's best-selling 1989 novel, Like Water for Chocolate, was adapted into a critically acclaimed and internationally successful film in 1992. Now it's become a 6-part miniseries on HBO, thanks in part to the Mexican actress, director, producer Salma Hayek Pino, who decided that the 1992 film, which is only 105 minutes long, needed to be fleshed out and updated a bit for our time. She's also said that that movie was really inspirational for her as she was beginning her international career as an actor. Seeing that there could be a project of Mexican origin that had such global reach made her feel like, wait, maybe I can have a career too. The story follows the multi-generational entwinings of 2 upper-class families, the De la Garzas and the Musquises, who live on adjoining ranches in Mexico around the turn of the 20th century. It also, unlike the earlier adaptation of the novel, spends quite a bit of time on the less fortunate characters in the story, the domestic servants and ranch hands who've spent their lives working for the De la Garzas and Musquises. Let's listen to a clip from the second episode of Like Water for Chocolate. In this clip, you'll hear Azul Guaita as Tita, the main character, who we'll get into in our discussion, and Irene Azuela as her mother. They're confronting each other around the family table about the mother's inflexible insistence that Tita's true love since childhood, Pedro Musquiz, the next-door neighbor. You can watch this show in many different languages on HBO Max using the language settings, but be warned that the English dubbing is pretty terrible. That's the reason that we watched it with Spanish with subtitles, and you will also hear a clip here in Spanish. Even if you don't understand the language, though, this should give you a sense of the tone of the show and a little bit of the music.
Tita, tú te vas a encargar de las invitaciones. Y también le vas a ayudar a Nacha a preparar los platillos en el banquete.
Mami, ¿le puedo hacer una pregunta?
¿Qué quieres saber?
¿Usted de verdad es mi mamá? Porque es extraño que siendo mi mamá me trate en el modo en el que me trata.
Basta, Tita.
Porque siempre busca hacerme daño. ¿Qué le hice yo para que...
¡Basta, Tita! ¡Cállate! ¡Cállate!
Claro, mamá. Yo me callé.
All right, Julia, I think that you're familiar with the novel Like Water for Chocolate. You mentioned that you had read it and seen the earlier adaptation. What did you go into this project thinking of the whole idea?
Well, it's been such a long time. I mean, I read that book when it came out. You know, it was a Mexican novel that was translated into English in the early 90s, I think 92, and was a hit read then. So I was, you know, a early teen. And then when the Miramax film came out, I went and saw it. And, you know, it was one of the books I loved as a teenager. And then I remember being drawn to the kind of creativity of the structure of it. It's built around these recipes. It was probably one of my first exposures to magical realism. You know, that's a form that isn't one that has resonated deeply with me and that I probably need to read deeper into. But this particular iteration of it, I always loved. If you had asked me, does that need to be remade right now? I don't know that I would have said yes. It seemed like a beautiful thing that existed when it existed. So I didn't come into this adaptation with any expectation other than like, oh, people say this is good. All right, let's check it out. And it was so interesting to see it, and also so interesting on a couple levels. One, the performances are wonderful, at least if you listen to them in Spanish. I made the mistake of having my TV defaulted to the English dub for the first, 4 minutes I was watching, and it was just not watchable in that form, in my view. But once I figured out how to watch it in Spanish with the subtitles, the kind of clarity and potency of the performances really comes through, and the precision of them. And the notion of amping up the realism alongside the magical realism and bringing into focus the kind of class dynamics, the historical context, the political and social and economic milieu in which this story happens, to me, added an entire dimension. I mean, I also just knew a lot less about politics and history in the world encountering this text as a 15-year-old. But I think this adaptation really brings that to the fore in ways that enriched it. There are only 2 episodes out and only 2 episodes made available for us as screeners, so we don't totally know yet exactly where this will land or go, but I'm intrigued so far.
What about you, Steve? Did this hook you enough that you might keep on watching for the next 4?
I mean, there's some stuff that really landed for me near the end of episode 2. To that point, I was kind of a semi-hard no, and I softened considerably. I mean, this TV show is what you get if you were to cross 100 Years of Solitude with the Guns N' Roses November Rain video. It's like sumptuous, exceedingly, some might say slightly pretentiously painterly in its scene, mise en scène or whatever, and it's melodramatic in its arcs and beats. The food porn is off the charts, mesmerizing. And it's, it really is very broadly drawn. It's a Cinderella story. Her mother, who to this point, I know nothing about this. I've never read it or seen it before, so I'm not spoiling anything, but you are certainly led to believe this might not be her biological mother, but the woman who is her biological mother, who's actually just, in terms of the archetypes of kind of acting like a wicked stepmother, is just unbearably cruel and non-maternal to her. The favoring of I will say also, and I wonder if you guys notice this, there's something to this point that I've watched, which is a little more than 2 hours into it, exceedingly lookist about this show so far. It revels in the, sort of pouty beauty of the lead, who, is our heroine and who deserves the love of the handsome neighbor. And there's as depicted, significantly less attractive, like they pointing up in a comical way how sort of austere and plain the sister is. And that's equated with undeservingness. And there's a pitilessness to that. And among the reasons I want to keep watching it is I sense that might be about to be complicated in ways that are possibly interesting. But up to now, it doesn't, until the very end of the second episode, you sort of thought, I don't know that they're going to complicate that. And actually, it's too in keeping with the luscious, porny food, the use of the sort of recycling of the Cinderella archetypes, the very, very broadly drawn political backdrop of revolution brewing in a Padrone-run Mexico. That said, I'm just curious whether you guys sort of think this is the kind of escapist balm that could kind of work now for viewers, including the three of us. I suspect it might be.
Yeah, that was kind of why I wanted to choose it for this week. When we were discussing what to talk about on this incredibly fraught week, our first show after the 2024 election, as I remember, I shot down one idea that was marginally more depressing and said, you know what, we need one topic that is just, floofy and pleasurable. And that ended up being like water for chocolate. So I think, the part of it that we haven't really talked about is this is kind of, I had in my notes, this is not a bodice ripper, but it's a something, it's like an embroidered folk tunic ripper. It's like got this beautiful design of, early 20th century Mexico. But it really is, like you say, Steve, a Cinderella story. And then, two good looking people like with impossible obstacles to their love. And it definitely hits that spot if you want something that is kind of beautiful and lushly produced and swooningly romantic. About the looksism, I have a slight response to that, which is that although the actress Azul Guaita is really good as Tita, like she creates a real character, and I have no specific critique of her performance, I think she is miscast in part because she's too beautiful. And Lumi Cavazos, the wonderful Mexican actress who played Tita in the 1992 movie, while she is a lovely human being, is not TV beautiful. She looks sort of more like a regular person. And also something about the way this actress playing Tita is being directed or written, there's a kind of girl boss quality to the character that really goes against sort of the whole essence of this character is she's beaten down by her mother, right? Like she has to learn to stand up to her and say no. And that's kind of the course of the narrative that's being put in place. But from the moment we meet this Tita, she not only is a ridiculously gorgeous TV level knockout, but she seems to be like very sassy, and very aware of her kind of downtrodden state. And I sort of missed Lumi Cavazos, who's a much more kind of recessive type at the beginning and kind of blossoms over the course of the movie.
Well, it's just a choice that will create a different arc. Like the part of the expressing emotion through food storyline is suggestive of the fact that she's not expressing it other ways, that the kind of emotion that she doesn't feel empowered to express elsewhere comes out through the food. And one thing I loved about this is, I think as we were discussing the topics, I was thinking, why would you remake that? It's incredible to see a Latin American IP revisited. We're in this moment where what Hollywood is doing is trying to find wonderful old things that everybody loved and figure out a way to make a new spin on them. And we're also in a moment of thinking through representation in Hollywood, a broad moment. And it's really striking when you study that and look at it, the degree to which Latino and Hispanic representation in Hollywood is bleak and is way behind representations of other groups. Hollywood has plenty of problems representing plenty of people, but in a deep irony, given what a Latino city and place Los Angeles and Hollywood are, it's been particularly bad at that. And there's obviously been many projects and inroads and interesting initiatives over the past few years, but I sort of loved the luxury of being able to reach back into the vault and find a really rich and wonderful text that gets its reboot. Like if Will and Grace can have its reboot that has its pros and cons, like, yes, let's have like Water for Chocolate too. It's rare because there aren't so many things like Water for Chocolate in Hollywood's history. And so I enjoyed that reimagination, like whether or not it turns out to be the right choice or the wrong choice or a great and effective choice or not for this particular version of Tita to be sassy from the jump instead of to slowly acquire power over the course of the narrative. Like how great. Like there's like the sumptuousness of the project itself, but also there's something that felt luxurious and lovely about that too, that Salma Hayek, as a powerful person in Hollywood now, could look back on this project that was so momentous to her as she was wondering what her career path might be and how expansive or limited it might be coming into Hollywood in the 90s, that she could look back on this text that was important to her then and drive a reinterpretation of it for this moment.
Yeah, I think that says it really well, Julia. This may not be 100% my cup of Mexican hot chocolate with cinnamon, although there's only 4 more episodes, so I'll probably finish it. I love that it's only 6 episodes long, which I think is kind of the perfect length for an adaptation of a novel into a miniseries. But I'm really glad it's out there. I think that people that need this right now, people that need some really, really delicious slow pans across tables full of feasts and some, sort of magical realist whimsy and hot romance, they should have it. They should have it and they should eat it all up.
Yeah, I loved Steve's November Rain, 100 Years of Solitude metaphor. Another metaphor that came up from one of the critics we read was Bridgerton. And I do think, although I only watched the first season of Bridgerton, like this is period romance in an era of restrictive gender rules and with sumptuous costumes and scenes. And it's a little less sexy. It's a little more suggestive than Bridgerton, but just to put it in the pile of if you liked, you may also like, I would add that to the consideration set as you're deciding whether to watch this.
All right. Well, it's like Water for Chocolate. It's on HBO. It only airs once a week. It's not one of those sudden drops, but it does show afterwards on HBO Max.
Have you heard who the latest power couple is? Well, you won't see this coming. It's Discover and Cashback. Feeling let down? You won't be when you hear how Discover automatically doubles the cash back earned on your credit card at the end of your first year with Cashback Match, all with no sign-up required and no limit to how much they'll match. See, isn't that a couple you want to root for? It pays to Discover. See terms at discover.com/credit card.
Listening on Audible helps your imagination soar. No matter what genre you love, you can be inspired to imagine new worlds, new possibilities, and new ways of thinking. I am on record as a huge Audible fan. I'm always listening to at least one audiobook. Because I'm always talking about one special narrator on Audible who I adore, the British actress Juliet Stevenson, I will talk about a different Audible narrator this time, the absolute best reader of Charles Dickens, and in fact, the only way that one should ever experience Charles Dickens again, including picking up a book, is Simon Vance, who is one of the legendary audiobook narrators out there. He understands the humor, he does the voice characterizations perfectly. Bleak House is the current Simon Vance book we're listening to in my household. And by we, I mean we listen to it on car rides. We put it on in the background once in a while when we're doing chores. But Audible isn't just about listening to audiobooks. You can also enjoy original musical narratives and audio productions designed exclusively for Audible listeners that showcase today's most influential artists. There's more to imagine when you listen. New members can try Audible now free for 30 days with your first audiobook included. Visit audible.com/culture or text culture to 500-500. That's audible.com/culture or text culture to 500-500. A defining quality of this election cycle, writes the media critic Charlie Warzel in last week's Atlantic, has been that few people seem to be able to agree on what constitutes the media, what their role ought to be, or even how much influence they have in 2024. It can feel existential at times, competing for attention and reckoning with the truth that many Americans don't read, trust, or really care all that much about what papers, magazines, or cable news have to say. Warzel has a lot more interesting things to say there that I'm sure we'll get into. But I guess I should just start off by saying, like, this is a topic, the state of the media, that we've been circling around, discussing in various permutations, obviously, for a while, as, you know, things rapidly change in the technological, economic sphere of how the media is defined. But this week, it really seemed like, as confusing as the discussion may be at this moment, this is the moment to have it, because clearly whatever happened last Tuesday has something to do with the media environment, or the many siloed different media environments that Americans are existing in. So I don't know that I have a question to start off with here, Julia, but because we have you on the show, and actually one reason we've been putting this off is we wanted to do it when all three of us were on the show to discuss it. I guess I'm just coming to you with a bundle of confused, frantic gestures and saying, can you please talk to us? You're an Annenberg School Fellow. Talk to us about the state of the media and tell us how to fix it.
You guys, I figured it out. That's what I've been doing this year, and don't worry, I've got all the answers. Well, one of the things that Warzel mentions in that piece is a line that Elon Musk and then Trump echoed after the election, right? Which is the line, "You are the media now." And it started with Musk, I think, in taking a celebratory victory lap for what his acquisition of and administration of Twitter has wrought, which is kind of a platform where all kinds of things are put forward and fly that might not have in previous Twitter administrations. But more broadly, it feels like a potent phrase because this is an election in which so many consumers and voters seem to be getting their information from sources we couldn't have imagined 10 or 15 years ago, right? So much information is coming from little tiny talking heads on your phone, or long-winded talking heads in your earbuds, or your friends or your peers. People have talked about, is this the podcast election? Is this the influencer election? Is this the phone election? But I think more broadly, it's the election where, looking back at it, the debates over whether, there's sort of two debates happening, right? One is, did media calibrate their coverage appropriately throughout? Did they cover Biden's age well enough, early enough? Did they cover Trump's age and insane ramblings clearly enough? Were they platforming Trump? Were they minimizing his excesses and eccentricities? Did they do a good job of what several people articulated needed to be done 2 years ago, which is don't cover the man, cover what he would do? You can have various debates about how well the media conducted itself and how well it learned the lessons of the 2016 and 2020 cycle in covering a candidate as unusual as Trump. And then there's the second debate, which is, does any of that matter? Like, is anybody reading it? Does it matter if the media gets it right or not? Or is the percentage of the American public that actually consumes what the traditional news media produces dwindling to a degree where what they do actually has no impact and people are just choosing to get their information from somewhere else? And I'm sort of curious. I mean, I have thoughts on both sides of the coin. I think the second question is the more relevant and interesting one, but I'm curious how you guys are thinking about that, whether you're more focused on the did the media get it right question, or does the media even matter question?
Well, I've thoughts on that, but first I think it's important to pick apart the Orwellian inversion behind "you are the media," because what Trump and Musk are trying to say is that once there was, or imply, is once there was this sort of Edward R. Murrow-derived media oligopoly, and the gatekeeper and the sage were all powerful. And that actually restricted your access to the truth. That's what Trump and Musk want to apply, that Main Street media, the MSM, was actually a monopoly / oligopoly, and it effectively brainwashed Americans and prevented them from discovering the truth. Of course, that's a total inversion of, there were all kinds of issues with a highly concentrated media ownership and a handful of super empowered gatekeepers and pundits telling you what the truth was, and they did often get it wrong, spectacularly so with Vietnam and a multitude of other issues. But the general ethos, especially in the post-war decades, of the very mainstream media, i.e. the CBS News as derived from Murrow down to Cronkite and Rather, and the New York Times as owned by the Sulzbergers, they were rigorous in their ethics and their fact checking in an attempt to tell the truth, as sometimes blind to it as they might have been. Whereas in the age of the internet, "you are the media" implies, first of all, it's a fatuous compliment meant to say that you don't need gatekeepers. You're enough. So it taps into something highly diluted, in my opinion, and narcissistic about the person it's meant to flatter. And secondly, it just makes the fundamental error of the internet, which is that it is a mirror pretending to be a window, right? And in fact, what people are getting are highly self-curated versions of the truth that they themselves have selected, designed to flatter themselves in the mirror of their own making maximally, or an algorithm-produced truth that compounds that tendency to have affinities expressed online, like the TikTok algorithm being the most successfully addictive and insidious one, or the actual gatekeepers, people like Musk, tweaking an algorithm, which is in no way a blind process, in order to manipulate public opinion, far more than Hearst did, back in the 30s. And so I just think it's important to say that "you are the media" is as deeply nauseating as anything producing deep nausea these days. As to the two subjects that Julia said, I've spoken enough, so let me punt it to Dana, but I'll have thoughts on those later.
Yeah. Wow. A lot to think about. A mirror pretending to be a window is good, Steve. You should trademark that one. As to Julia's distinction between the two questions, did the media get it right? Does the media even matter? To me, it seems that question number 2 is obviously the more important, because until we get through thinking through that, we're not going to be able to start tinkering with getting it right. The question of what the media is, where it is for different groups of people, where it's located. And, in this era that we're going into, where it seems like the owner of one of the most powerful social media platforms in the world is basically utterly in bed with Trump, right? I keep thinking of this photograph. I still can't get over that they released this photograph. I think it was the night of the election or the next night. It's like the Trump family lined up at Mar-a-Lago smiling triumphantly. Melania is not in it and Elon Musk is. Like, what does that mean? What is it meant to convey? It is so profoundly disturbing. So yeah, I think the question of the media mattering or not mattering, existing or not existing within various people's windows and mirrors and pocket phones is the thing that needs to be thought about. And it throws me into a panic, even trying to think about it. You know, as I guess in some way a member of that media, you know, obviously not a political journalist, but, you know, somebody who is part of the meaning making machine that's now called the mainstream media. I really, really want to know how to fix and address and change any of these things.
I think there are a couple ways of thinking about it. And I think the more obvious and simple one, simple to describe, maybe not simple to fix, is about the broader technological and attention economy. And then I think the one that's more difficult to diagnose and talk about does have to do with ideology and newsrooms. But let me take them one at a time. So, I mean, I've been really struck over the last 4 years by how much of the terrain of American attention American classical newsrooms have abdicated. And I understand why they have, but I think it's like a crisis and a tragedy. And I think we're living with the consequences of it today. What I mean by that is what we spend our time doing on our phones, and that's a broad American we, is no longer reading things on sites or apps, by and large. The dominance of social video in TikTok and Reels and YouTube. Obviously, video and social have been important for at least 3 or 4 election cycles now, but the just intense stickiness of social video has not been properly reckoned with or pursued by the American news media. And I mean, I will say that myself, and maybe you guys are not in the same boat, but like as someone who navigated many pivots to video in the 2010s and who is very proud of having prevented Slate from pivoting to video at various points when it wouldn't have made economic sense for Slate to do so, my own attention has pivoted to social video. I did not used to watch video online. I used to think it was annoying and long and baggy and took forever to get to the point. It seemed like a waste of my time. And these little bitsy, bitesy clips they get me. They have hooked my attention. I spend time watching them. I spend time watching videos of people frosting cakes and videos of women in Croatia getting dressed and videos of people who have really good Brazilian accents and who can do great imitations of this and that and whatever the algorithm is telling me to watch now. I mostly do it on Reels. I'm not a big TikToker. I went out and had lunch after seeing the movie yesterday. The woman next to me it seemed to be on TikTok in Chinese and was just watching video after video of cats, like just cat faces nuzzling the camera. And then she would go to another cat nuzzling the camera for her whole lunch, just cats. So like, this is where our attention is. Maybe it is not. Do you guys watch social video? Has it gotten you?
No, not. I think I'm more like what you described you were before. Like, this is long and boring. Get to the point.
How about you, Steve?
I don't have any of that technology. Like,
okay, so we've got
apps or anything.
Look at these 2 beautiful specimens. Like, let's put them in a vitrine. We've got, Steve's like still reading Hegel in a chair in the corner. God bless him. But like, there are fewer.
My cork-lined room, like Proust.
Yeah, but like, you guys are. I think that the type of people who consume the media in the way that you do is diminishing. And it's not that I don't read. And I entirely watch cake frosting videos, but like, I can just feel the potency of it, even on me, someone who has devoted a decades-long career to making information for people, right? This shift in our attention, the rise of TikTok and Reels happened in around like the wide-scale adoption happened in the pandemic, right? It was sort of ready, it was burgeoning, it was starting to happen in the late 2010s. And at the exact moment when it became the dominant way that people were spending their attention, American newsrooms were in abject economic crisis because of the pandemic. There were layoffs, there were furloughs, the advertising market collapsed, the audience went up, but it was not clear how to monetize it. So people didn't launch huge TikTok channels then. Then, things stabilized a little bit. and it seems like maybe TikTok's going to get banned. Also, all of these newsrooms have learned the lessons of the 2010s, which is don't chase every social platform out the window. Like so many newsrooms did what Facebook wanted, then did what Twitter wanted, then did what Google wanted, then did what all of these other tech giants wanted in order to find attention. And then as soon as the tech giant changes strategy, the newsroom is left exposed in various fashions. And there's many newsrooms that have collapsed and no longer exist because they bet too much on following where the tech platforms led them. So again, all of these are rational decisions, not to like run full tilt at this new place where American attention is and figure out how to be useful and important there. And there's also some structural difficulties, even if you did do it, which is what people connect with on those platforms is personality, voice, perspective, and not necessarily all of the things that classic news networks have valued. You know, there have also been smart experiments. The Washington Post was early on to TikTok, and they have like a whole little team that does great stuff. My old boss at the LA Times, Kevin Merida, invested in a social team that was trying to figure out how to build a smart audience on TikTok around the Los Angeles Times' work. It's not that nobody's doing anything. Obviously, there's vertical video. Our buddy Jamel's vertical video interpretations of the world are on the New York Times homepage sometimes. People are trying, but just it's like there's a vast new continent that everyone moved to. And the classic news media has like set up a tiny flickering campfire on the near shore and has like only begun to figure out how do you put real information into this place? How do you attract attention to real information? Honestly, like being the person who shows up and is like, excuse me, but the actual way that this is happening is this is like not a recipe for, you know, virality. So it's a huge intellectual and attention problem that like we've barely begun to solve.
Right. And it's very hard to know what the relationship is going to be between, you know, something like the old gatekeeper conscience coming along and saying, here's how to regulate it in order to have democracy survive the internet revolution, and just being astride one of those mutations in cultural history that is so huge that forget it, right? Like we are riding it like the giant worms in Dune, like, you know, good luck trying to direct or harness it. This is a second Gutenberg revolution, right? And in the first Gutenberg revolution, we went from being a people of the book, like a very select group of books, like basically the Quran and the Bible and the Torah, to being people of books. And that was a revolution in human consciousness. You know, it wasn't just that there were suddenly more books, it's that human beings became new kinds of creatures. And in addition to all of the enlightenment and progress that brought, it also brought 200 years of bloody sectarian warfare. And we're in the middle of as big a revolution. There is no way to get around it. It is very much as big a revolution as the Gutenberg one. And so it's maybe it helps put in perspective this one tiny blip in that, you know, giant turn of events known as the 2024 election, or maybe it just deepens our sense of despair in the face of it. I mean, I don't see volition on the part of conscientious people who are products of the first Gutenberg revolution coming along now and finding a way to even shut the barn door a little bit on the second Gutenberg revolution in favor of the values that were produced by books and, you know, and long, you know, analytic and discursive forms of attention. I don't know. Anyway, it's too overwhelming to get one's head around. But Julia, if anyone can do it, I have a lot of faith in you and people like you. So courage.
Well, I'm heartened by the conversations that are happening about what's happening in the news and the other beat, which we don't have to get too far into. But I do think like the Joe Rogans of the world are sort of famous and famously criticized in some quarters for their like just asking questions vibe. And there are a lot of people who revile Joe Rogan for being willing to entertain worse than pseudoscience about things like vaccines and just sort of flirting with all kinds of bad ideas and fomenting bad information without a real rigorous filter. But I do think what that misses about Rogan and various corners of the ecosystem that are not just cat and frosting videos is that they're entertaining questions that people have. And I I wonder if the media can do a better job of that. It is true that newsrooms are less ideologically diverse than they've ever been, and that I've had the experience in the last couple years of encountering questions outside of newsrooms that you never encounter inside newsrooms, having conversations with middle of the road people who say, like, why shouldn't we need voter IDs? Seems kind of crazy that we don't have IDs when you vote. Like, that seems like an important thing where why wouldn't you show an ID? And that's just an example, but like the set of American histories and valences around what requiring voter ID means politically and who it empowers and who it disempowers. And there's like a set of infrastructure around how to think about voter ID. You know, I've had the experience within the last couple of years of someone who's sort of a middle of the road person, not a massive news consumer, lovely person, wants good things in society, being like, why don't we require voter ID? It seems like a totally normal thing to do. They do it in a lot of other countries. Seems super rational. And sort of it just forcing me to recognize like how much infrastructure around how that's covered and how we think about it and what the kind of racial and practical history of voter ID requirements are is sort of baked into coverage and assumption. Like, just, I don't know, there's a whole media ecosystem out there that is meeting people with the questions they actually have rather than the questions and priors they should have, that I think it's worth newsrooms thinking about too.
Oh dear. See, this is why I'm glad we left Like Water for Chocolate in this week's lineup, because we needed a little bit of cream fritters and bodices in there somewhere. The weather is getting cooler, and that means there's a lot to look forward to. Football games, pumpkin spice lattes, if that's your kind of thing, or if you like my kind of thing, slipping into cozy sweaters from Quince. I happen to be wearing a Quince item, not even knowing we were reading one of their ads today. Since it was turning into fall, I thought I would try a Quince cashmere sweater because people rave about their cashmere. And yeah, it's the color that makes it. It's this thick, juicy kind of cashmere, the kind that you know isn't going to pill. Anyway, Quince is full of such luscious cashmere items that you can scroll through at will and try to find something that suits your taste. In addition to cashmere sweaters, they have beautiful leather jackets, cotton cardigans, lots of silk classics that we've talked about before. And they're able to price these products really, really fairly by partnering directly with top factories and cutting out the middleman, which passes the savings on to you. Quince only works with factories that use safe, ethical, and responsible manufacturing practices. And of course, premium fabrics and finishes for that luxury feel in every piece. So get cozy in Quince's high-quality wardrobe essentials. Go to quince.com/culture for free shipping on your order and 365-day returns. That's QUINCE.com/culture to get free shipping and 365-day returns. Quince.com/culture. It's the moment in this week's show where we talk about le business. Julia, what have you got?
We have three matters to discuss this week. First up, we are introducing a new segment/project here at the Slate Culture Gabfest. One of our responses to the election news last week was to think, what should we go back and watch and or consume, read, listen to, think about to help us understand this moment in history? And we had a couple of ideas for potential projects or films, but we thought it would be more interesting to throw it out to you, our listeners. So email us at culturefest@slate.com. Please use the subject line culture flashback and then propose what movie, TV episode, book, short story, poem should we read and think about and have as a flashback topic to help us understand the moment in which we find ourselves. Maybe, as Steve says, we should just go back to Gutenberg and let us know. We'll take suggestions and we'll experiment with a semi-regular segment that reaches a little further back into cultural history than we typically do. So that's culturefest@slate.com and use flashback in your subject line. That's topic one. Topic two is coming to the end of the year, which means we are preparing for our annual call-in show, and we need questions, thoughts, ideas from you. So please call 260-337-8260. That's 260-337-8260 to ask us a question. Leave a voicemail and tell us what you want to hear us talk about. They can be picayune, they can be vast. We love your questions. We've got such great ones each week or each year that we do this. And we always love hearing from you. So again, 260-337-8260. Please send your year-end questions. And if for some reason you are shy, you can also email us at culturefest@slate.com, but it's great to have the audio if possible. Finally, what comes next is our Slate Plus segment. This week we decided to address the complex and precise question, how you doing? We're going to talk a little bit about how we're feeling in the wake of last week's election news. And you can find that How You Doing special plus bonus conversation this week as a standalone little mini segment in your feed. If you're not a Slate Plus member, you can sign up today at slate.com/cultureplus. Members get ad-free podcasts and lots of bonus content like the Slate Plus segment I just mentioned. You'll also get to hear members-only programming on other Slate shows like Slow Burn and the Political Gabfest. And members get unlimited access to all the great writing on slate.com. You'll never hit a paywall if you're a Slate Plus member. You'll also be supporting our work and the work of our brilliant colleagues. These memberships are really important for Slate, so please sign up today at slate.com/cultureplus. Again, that's slate.com/cultureplus, or subscribe now on Apple Podcasts by clicking Try Free at the top of our show page.
All right. Well, we've shambled our way to the point in the Slate Culture Gabfest where we endorse. Steve, in retaliation for all the times you've made me endorse first, I go first to you. What did you experience this week that lifted you out of whatever else state you were in?
I don't know that anything to be honest, but we're not allowed to do 2 endorsements, nor should we, but this is going to be 1.25 endorsements. So I absolutely loved the early 2000s independent movie Igby Goes Down. It features a wonderfully lubricious performance, as always, from Jeffrey Goldblum. I somehow I haven't seen it in a long time, had never put 2 and 2 together that the young person playing Igby in this very Holden Caulfield-like life situation is Kieran Culkin. So I actually endorsed that movie probably, God knows, 15 years ago on this show. I'm 0.25 endorsing it again. It's not actually my endorsement, but my mind only just got blown by this fact. So I really highly recommend that movie. It's not seen enough, and now there's this great excuse for a lot of new people to discover it, which is Kieran Culkin's now a big star, and people want more of him. So Igby Goes Down is not my endorsement. My endorsement is an essay by the editor of The Baffler, review essay by the editor of The Baffler, Noah McCormick, in the New Republic on Jessica Mitford and her escape from fascism, and her memoir, Huns and Rebels, HONS and Rebels, which I haven't read, but I've now ordered from a secondhand bookseller. It's out of print, but there is a New York Review of Book version of it, and it's not hard to find online. But his essay, Noah McCormick's essay on the Mitford family, oh my God, do you guys know about the Mitfords? I mean, I knew a little bit. That one was a fascist and one was a socialist and one was a this and the other was that. What a wild menagerie!
Yeah, they need a miniseries, right?
Oh
they need
my
a 6-part
God, yes,
series.
Absolutely. And this review is just, we'll post to it, obviously. I mean, first of all, Noah McCormick, you are a wonderful, enviably gifted, lucid writer. I really love your work, and this is a tremendously good example of it. But he just leads you, as the best review essays do, into and through the book, makes you want to read it very badly. He doesn't upstage it, but he just introduces you very quickly to this bizarre, wonderfully bizarre, but also sort of nauseatingly bizarre cast of characters, depending on which one you're focusing on, and how they all could have coexisted in a single household. And then Jessica Mitford, just her existence sprawls in this wonderful way across the entire landscape of 20th century history. And she ends up kind of an honorary American, I guess. I don't know. But her publisher was the legendary Robert Gottlieb at Knopf, who got her to produce a number of books that now I'm dying to read anyway. So we will link to the essay, Jessica Mitford's Escape from Fascism by Noah McCormick in the New Republic.
All right, Julia, what about you? What have you got?
You guys, I have a new interpretive theory as to why Trump won, which happens to also be the long-awaited results of my Do You Whoop When You See Nicole Kidman at AMC survey. So I finally had time this weekend to tabulate the results. Thank you to all of you who answered my call a few months ago to let me know whether when Nicole Kidman and her sparkly pinstripe suit show up on stage at your local AMC, do the assembled moviegoers hoot, cheer, whoop, and or recite the text of the promo along with Nicole, or did they sit there in sullen silence? This was prompted by my going to a movie in New York City, seeing Nicole whooping as any normal person does, and having the entire theater like respond with numb shock and feeling like a rube for the first time ever in New York City, a city that has always been welcoming to me and that I have long called home. So we got 19 responses. So this survey is scientific, definitive, and outpaces Nate Cohn and Nate Silver's polling research combined. You're finally getting the real deal here.
Nate.
Honestly, your sampling is probably more reliable than theirs.
I mean, honestly, they kind of called it, Dana. But anyway, we had 19 respondents, 5 of whom reported whoops and hollers in their local cinemas. So that's about 26% said yay and 74 nay. Interestingly, the geographic dispersal of these suggests that the whooping is almost entirely a West Coast and Mountain West phenomenon. We've got 2 no's in Atlanta. We've got a no in the Northern Virginia exurbs. We're looking at you exurbs. We've got a no in Indianapolis. We've got a no in the East Bay, a rare West Coast no. We've got a no in Albuquerque. We've got 2 no's in Seattle, 1 in San Francisco, 1 in Colorado, DC, Hawaii, Florida, literally normal Illinois. They don't do it there. And that's our 14. Our yeses come from Seattle, San Francisco, 2 yeses in Colorado, both Denver. Props to Denver for its whooping culture, and 1 in LA. All of the yeses note that it's only a sometimes phenomenon, depends a little bit on the type of movie. I did not whoop before the Holocaust movie, by the way, which I did see at an AMC yesterday, but I eschewed the whoop, and so did my fellow moviegoers. We're not crazy. And we got a couple just lovely notes about this. But my conclusion based on that scientific survey is that this is largely a West Coast phenomenon. One listener, Jay in Seattle, who describes himself as a New York theater transplant, says that the phenomenon happens sometimes there, and now they're going more frequently to matinees. So they write, in recent years, as our situation has changed and we go out to fewer movies, we tend to go during more populated showings. And it pleases me to no end when, maybe 50% of the time, there is a small but mighty collective, "Hey!" when the ad begins, as if a homosexual Fonz just elbowed the ornery movie projector and up popped our queen, sparkling and glorious. Of course, I would still love to experience the grander phenomenon as I hear it occurs elsewhere. At the same time, there is something special about knowing that there is a contingent of like-minded people around us, people who undoubtedly, like we did, lit up instinctively from their guts that very first time she washed over them. It's comforting to share in something so deeply silly yet sweet with a dark room of strangers. Long may she be ambassador to us, and long live the movies. All right, all hail that wonderful encomia to Nicole. My diagnosis here is that not enough of America is cheering at Nicole. We are a joyless nation, and that explains the entire election, and you should all cheer when you see her at your local AMC. The end.
Oh, absolutely. I love how scientific that investigation was, Julia. The geographical breakdown. It's fantastic. Oh, here's for big data for small samples. Okay, I'm going to piggyback on Steve's 1.25 and actually do a tiny shout out and thank you to listeners too. If you remember a few shows back, because I have a new oven that I'm very excited about finally being able to bake in, I recommended a recipe, Mark Bittman's roasted cod and potatoes, and asked for oven-only recipes. I got a whole bunch from listeners. I'm still going through them and responding. I haven't tried any of them yet, but I am going to try to do some Julia-style data collection and make a couple of those recipes, compile them all together, make a list to post. So thank you to everyone who is sending me, one sheet type baking recipes as winter begins. And you'll hear more about that at some point. All right, that was my 0.25. My other endorsement, and the one that relates to our last topic this week about the current state of the media, is just the most recent edition of On the Media, the venerable NPR show, now a podcast as well, with the wonderful Brooke Gladstone as co-host. They did such a special and fantastic thing for the week after the election, which is that the first 15 minutes of their last show is just their topics call, where they were trying to decide, what the hell do we do? What do we program? What do this show dedicated to talking about the U.S. media do with, the fact that the media has brought us to this point? And it's just so great to go behind the scenes. I don't even always listen to On the Media. I listen to it, when there's a guest I'm interested in or when it sort of comes across my feed. But I really recommend going and listening to at least the first 15 minutes of the most recent episode of On the Media, because it's really a kind of raw, emotional, behind the scenes conversation between the producers and the hosts, just talking about, what do we cover? How do we decide what we cover going forward? What is the meaning of our show in this new media landscape? And it's really a fantastic listen. So On the Media, most recent episode post-election, especially the first 15 minutes.
Is that, Julia, as the resident archivist and historian of all things Slate, isn't that the origins of the Gabfest franchises?
Yeah, that was Andy Bowers' idea, that you should just hear the editorial meeting or what the journalists talk about when they talk about the stories instead of when they're presenting them to you. I will definitely check that out. I am also an occasional but long timer on the media, and that definitely sounds like a great one.
I mean, I definitely don't want our topics calls to be ever broadcast. We don't sound nearly as smart and organized. There's a lot more flailing and like, what are we doing again? But yeah, this one is really, really worth a listen. All right, well, that brings us to the end of our main show this week. You'll find links to some of the things we talked about today on our show page, which is slate.com/culturefest. You can also always email us at culturefest@slate.com. Our producer is Jared Downing, our production assistant is Kat Hong, and the composer of our theme music is Nicholas Bertel. If you're a Plus member, be sure to listen to our bonus segment, our Plus segment this week, which, as we said earlier, will be a pretty personal response to political events of last week. For Stephen Metcalf and Julia Turner, I'm Dana Stevens saying thank you so much for being a listener, and we'll talk to you again next week.